Has Red Bull been cheating? Have the other teams caught up? What was the purpose of the clarification of the recent mid-season changes or amendments to the FIA regulations? Who was behind the original brake bias or fiddle brake innovation? We're going to talk about all of these things, including the fact that if some team had found a way to bend the rules and find a competitive advantage. Welcome, you beautiful people. My name is Lucky. You know why you're here. We're here to talk about the sport that you and I love. We're going to get a bit technical on this video. So let's first start with what were the changes that were announced and updated onto the FIA technical regulations as of the 31st of July 2024, right? So the stuff that's on the screen and marked in pink are the changes that had been introduced, or rather clarified. There's actually no change because there's no strike off. There's been a clarification to the brake system Article 11, which ultimately says any system or mechanism which can produce systematically or intentionally asymmetric braking torques for a given axle is forbidden. So let's really break this down and understand what asymmetric braking is, what potential value you might ultimately have because of introducing these things, right? I'll link on the description below Craig Scarborough, who's a very well recognized technical mind in the F1 arena, has done a clear post on Twitter about what this is. So what is asymmetric braking? In my dummy brain, this is how I understand it. You have two tires, you have equivalent brake pressures in a normal road car. When you press your brake, both tires slow at the same rate. Asymmetric braking means the opposite of that, i.e. you can change the way one tire slows down or the speed at which one tire slows down compared to the other. So ultimately, it basically means that depending on what side the car turns, the bias of the brake would be introduced to the opposite side, right? So that's ultimately how I understand asymmetric braking. What you see here is basically how it could be implemented from a technical perspective, right? So as laterally you move from side to side, i.e. horizontally move from side to side, the pressure of that brake can shift with that lateral change, right? So ultimately you introduce a bias in terms of braking. So why do this, right? Why do all of this? So when we ask the question of why do this, we also can answer whether this was an innovation as of this season or whether someone before that had come through with a similar invention. We're going to go back to 1998, an aerodynamic genius in the name of Adriannewey at McLaren. At the time, it was called the brake fiddle, right? So there was a very similar solution. It was introduced and it was banned in those regulations as well. There are similarities in terms of who's potentially introduced it this time too. All allegements, nothing proven, but ultimately the innovation came across a few decades ago by a technical genius who is still on the grid. And if I go through some of the records from back in the day, I think Adrian quotes it would provide about 0.3 seconds a lap. And that in Formula One terms is a massive margin, right? So that would technically mean that your cornering speeds improve. Ultimately, this is where majority of the time is made up. And yes, on low downforce tracks like Monza, it might not be that impactful, but even in tracks like that, where cornering and exit is important so that you get the right exit and you maximize on your straights, the brake bias could be quite important because it ultimately would allow the car to be much more pliable to turn, and better turning and better handling. That would ultimately mean that the driver can drive the car to the limit and thus extracting more lap time, right? So the benefits are numerous, right? So ultimately, yes, it's 0.3 seconds on a lap, but ultimately it is better tire maintenance, improved car handling, and improved confidence. So it is a triple threat in terms of a highly competitive sport where you are chasing thousandths of a second. So I think now we kind of have to get into the rumor part as well, right? So why do people think it was Red Bull? So one of the reasons I already mentioned, right? So the technical genius who introduced this before is Adriannewey. He happened to be a technical consultant at that point in time. Yes, he has decided to leave Red Bull now, but he was at Red Bull at that point in time. So that's one of the main reasons. Another reason is when Max started to consistently complain about the brakes, right? In that vote, he mentioned that the car doesn't respond to his inputs, especially inputs largely means brake bias, right? So that's one example of it. Then in Hungary, he had the same complaints. In Miami, he went across the bollard because he wasn't able to turn into the corners appropriately. And again, the car handling was challenging, right? Another reason is that the Red Bull was amazing in terms of tire wear in 2022, but this year they haven't been that great. That could simply be because they've just extremely gone aggressive on the 22 concept, and they've gone over the curve and gone into the realms of marginal losses now than marginal gains. But at the same time, it could also be because one of the benefits of the asymmetric braking is better tire wear, because you balance the brakes depending on the load to which tire or which turn that particular load might be applied on. And lastly, I think this all kind of culminates to a lack or a drop of performance recently. So tire wear has fallen, and that could be because of the brake bias, but that could have mean that handling has fallen off, and that would mean that Max wouldn't be able to push the car to the limit that he would have previously had the confidence to do so. So ultimately that manifested in a drop in performance as well. So those are some of the reasons that people think that it could be Red Bull that had found the loophole and then or cheated on these regulations. That said, I always feel human bias is always trajecting towards the most successful team, right? Because if it wasn't Red Bull that actually did it, and if it was like Sauber, I don't think anyone would have cared, or they wouldn't even point the finger at Sauber because they're at the bottom of the table, right? So I don't necessarily think that there's evidence to it. There are coincidental facts that point the finger towards Red Bull. But ultimately, for me, the bigger question is this even cheating, right? Because if a regulation required additional clarification, like we previously saw that there is a pink section that has been added to clarify that regulation, that meant that there were thousands of people in this industry, some geniuses on that paddock, trying to comb through these regulations and find a way to find a competitive advantage and bend those rules. So in my eyes, this was a stroke of genius and found the right loophole, found the competitive edge, and continue to exploit it until clarified. There's been many instances like this. The DAS system from Mercedes, the hush deal of the engine from Ferrari in 2018, the double diffuser in the Braun era. You can go on and on and on about this, because this sport is the pinnacle of innovation on road. So is it cheating? No. Is there conclusive evidence that it was Red Bull who took advantage of this? Coincidentally, maybe, but there's nothing evidentially that proves that it is Red Bull that leveraged this system. It could be someone else. That's it for this video. If you guys like this video, smash that like button, hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, and I'll see you on the next video. Peace. Ciao.